So in line with MAP policy, I'll dispense with the lengthy introduction of our speakers. And I'd like to remind our speakers, you're given 15 minutes for your respective presentation. So that's 15 minutes. So I'd like to call on our first speaker now, the non-executive director of Grant Thornton International Limited and the head of APAC Cloudflare Inc., Ms. Aliza Knox. Hi, Aliza.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you very much for welcoming me to this august gathering. Congratulations to all of you for joining as members of MAP. It was really nice to be here for part of that. I put up a background of Singapore just because that's where I'm sitting. I haven't been to Manila in some time, unfortunately. I had a trip in March that was canceled as everything went into lockdown. So I'm very sorry I can't be there in person. I've been asked to talk a little bit, as have the other speakers, about what makes a future-ready board. And I see that some of you are already board members or very senior in your companies, and so I'm sure you have various board experiences to share. I will share some perspectives, and I think Patrick will let me know if there are questions. The question arises, or the issue arises, about a future-ready board because I think we need to think about what are the characteristics of boards today. Boards have been around for some time, and you have to think about, is this board working to take us into the future? And so maybe the signals just before I launch my presentation, and I know somebody's going to help me with slides. Are my slides up, by the way, Patrick? I can't see them. You're muted.
Yeah, I'll check with John.
So maybe if just the first slide could go up, and then I'll be able to speak to them in a minute. But there are these issues about, do we have a future-ready board, and how do we know? So here are some signs that your board might not be future ready. First, thank you. Yeah. So just the first slide is fine. So some signs that, if you could just go back one, please. Some signs that you might not have the board that you want to take you into the future. One, directors act more as a rubber stamp of management's ideas, neither challenging nor informing, right? You want, obviously, in most companies, management's very strong, but you do want the board to be able to ask questions thoughtfully and dig a little bit. Second sort of warning sign might be that the board of directors focuses only on operational performance. They do need to know the current metrics, but they also need to be looking into and asking about strategic trends and marketplace issues, and bringing some thoughts about those trends and issues to the meetings themselves, not just asking management. Another warning signal might be that directors all have similar backgrounds in area of expertise. You know, if they all came from within the company or from that industry, whether it be construction or hospitality or auto manufacturing, there's always a danger of a bit of groupthink when everybody has the same background. It could be the same issue if they're from the same suburb of Manila or if they're all from Singapore. Another warning sign might be that directors can sort of identify disruptive technologies, or they've heard of them, but they can't help the management get from awareness to application. In other words, from these are trends, but let us help you think about or ask you some leading questions to what should we be doing about this. And then I think the fifth factor that you really need to take as a warning sign is if directors sort of lack the perspective or the experience to be able to move the business from its current to its preferred state. They're comfortable with the way things are now and maybe uncomfortable with movement because it seems scary or risky. So those are 5 factors that might help you think about, hey, is my board future ready? And if it's not, then what do you need to do and why is this important? So if you can go to this slide, thank you very much. This is from an MIT study. Some of you might have seen the data was pulled in 2017 of companies with 6 or more directors and annual revenues over $1 billion. And so what you can see here on the left are a few measures: the return on assets, the profit margin, and the 3-year revenue growth, and the 3-year market cap growth. And what you see on the left are the measures for the savvy boards, the boards that were considered digitally knowledgeable. And what you can see in the middle are the measures for the boards that were not digitally savvy. And this was determined by MIT and their researchers on a number of factors. And so what's most important is the difference in the right-hand column, which is to say that for a board that was digitally savvy, the return on assets was 34% higher. The profit margin was 17% higher. The revenue growth over 3 years was 38% higher, and the market cap growth was 34% higher. In other words, there are very strong, very clear, measurable benefits if you have a digitally savvy board. And that is what I'm going to talk about today, which is using digitally savvy as a means to create a future-ready board. I don't think digital savviness is the only thing that makes a good board, but in terms of many of today's boards and making sure that they're future-ready, what is often missing is digital savviness. And since my background is Google and Twitter and now SaaS at Cloudflare, I think the most appropriate aspect for me to focus on is digital savviness. If you could go to the next slide, please. So in terms of digital savviness, there are a number of features we can talk about. One of them is the board using digital tools? This might sound very tactical or remedial, but I think it's important, and it's important for 2 reasons. 1, it shows board adaptability, and 2, in today's pandemic, in the times of COVID-19, these are tools that we really, really need, and we may need for the next year or so to make sure that boards can be as effective as possible. So the first thing that I think everybody's getting used to is our virtual board meetings. And of course, we're having a virtual map induction here. So that's very similar. And this shows that you guys are adaptable and willing to go with new approaches. So the kinds of things that we need to see is that, first of all, in the virtual board meetings, one benefit is you can see everybody. For a little while on the screen when we weren't looking at slides, I could see all of you, which was great. And where you sit doesn't matter. So it's interesting, in a board meeting, even things like who sits at the head of the table, who sits next to them, can dictate relationships or hierarchy or preference. So what happens on Zoom or Hangouts or any of the equivalents is that the table position goes away. So that's a benefit of doing virtual board meetings. Not saying that after COVID everything has to be virtual, but it's certainly worth considering. When you have virtual board meetings, you can make some changes that make the meetings really more effective. I think one thing to do, which you should do in any board, whether in person or virtual, is to really make sure people are doing pre-work. But once everyone is using board portals, and I'll come to those in a minute, you can read and share feedback online before the board meeting to get prepared. You don't have to do it during the board meeting. You can go to a more effective use of time where you perhaps make agendas, put them down to 15-minute increments, which is what our organizers have actually done today already. So they're ahead of the curve. So the people are very focused in short, sharp bursts. Then after either 60 or 90 minutes, which means 4 or 6 topics of focus, then you give people a 15 to 20-minute break, and perhaps even encourage them, depending on the lockdown circumstance, to go outside and walk or get in the sun, do something to really let their brain rest and refocus. And if you're at what's usually should be, especially in a future-ready board, an annual strategy session that would normally be something off-site over a few days, during these times, what boards have been doing that I've seen, best practice, is to spread the board strategy over a few days with some very focused shorter sessions. Another thing you can do with virtual board meetings is to use the features that most of these meeting rooms have to create personal sessions where you would have a smaller group of 3 or 4 board members. And you can use this to create board bonds and create future-ready boards in a way that doesn't happen in person. So what tends to happen in person at board meetings, in my experience, and I've been on boards for 10 years, various different kinds of boards in Germany, London, Australia, and Singapore, is that all of us have people we know on the board. So when there's a break, maybe we go to talk to those people more often. But if you force rotation in these meeting rooms and hangouts, you can have some little icebreakers like sweet and sour sessions, they're called, where people talk about what's going well or what's not going well, either personally or in the board, or talk about some personal and professional issues in these rotating chats, and really create a much more bonded board that's fully open to each other and fully ready to embrace new ideas. Another thing that's easier to do with the virtual board meetings is to bring in guest experts. For example, maybe, hopefully you'll consider me an expert at the end of the day today, but you know, maybe I couldn't have come to this meeting today because I would have had to fly and I would have had other meetings if this were pre-COVID. But I could show up to the MAP meeting today because we could do it virtually. And so there are many times where you'll be able to get good expertise to help with the future readiness because you've moved to virtual meetings, which allow more people to attend for shorter periods of time. So I think that virtual board meetings, not for every meeting, but for some, are going to become more and more important for future readiness. To make those work, boards need to be on board portals. There are a variety of brands. The ones I've used so far are Diligent and BoardVantage. I know there's another one called Onboard. Some of you may be using others, but they are terrific for ensuring security of the documents, so they're not going to your personal email, for having the ability to comment and share feedback, for keeping archives or libraries of material that might help the board. Maybe somebody on the board knows a lot about consumer trends, but not about the technology the board is using. Maybe someone else, it's vice versa. So there can be papers, white papers, documents that the company keeps on those board portals where you can get some extra information. Related to that, you can often share these or share some parts of the apps of this, obviously not all because some is confidential, with management, and therefore enable the board to interact in an appropriate way, but a little bit more often with management. I think there was a specific question to us as we were getting ready for these presentations about would there be robot board members? And I wanted to address that. You know, it's an idea that's coming with everything else. Like, is AI going to take over so much that we don't need people? And I do think companies are creating tools. I think there is a robo board tool out of Malaysia where they're using AI to try to compress long papers into key points. Although I would say that a good management team should be encouraged to do that for the board anyway. They shouldn't be giving you 300-page documents or even 30-page documents. For the most part, they should be compressing and highlighting for the board. Possibly to sift through as a robot and rationalize decisions, maybe to come up with some predictive scenarios and to monitor what decisions were made and how. So I think that we will start bringing in AI into most walks of life in the areas where computers can sift through lots of data and help us highlight things quickly. There's a great quote from Tim Cook, though, where he said, "I'm not worried about AI giving computers the ability to think like humans. I am more concerned about people thinking like computers." And you know, that's the issue, because what the board brings, what those of you already in this group bring who are board members or will bring when you become board members, is thinking forward. And that's the point about being future ready. What if this happened? Has this been tested? Is this true? What could we do? Those are the things that future ready boards think about, not what has been. And so if that's what you need to be future ready, it's not clear that you can be completely replaced by a robot. I think the robots can do analysis and some pattern recognition, but we need real life human beings still to think about the what if. Now, if we go to the digitization of thinking, so if you can move to the next slide. Could you move to the next slide?
Joanna.
Sorry, could somebody move to the next slide? Thank you. So for the digitization of board thinking, you know, this is the part that really makes a board future ready or not. And there are 4 categories that I want to talk about. The topics that are discussed at a board, the members on the board, the functions the board conducts, and a kind of a buzzword, tech fluency. So if we go to the next slide, please. Here are what I think are probably some of the key tech topics that you want to ask yourself, is my board spending time on? In a time of a lot, oops, could you go back, please? In a time of a lot of uncertainty, the board should be spending significant time looking at both cybersecurity and other risks to the business. Should also be looking at disruption and innovation. Who are the players that are coming up who might actually change the business? And I'll come to that in a minute. Digital transformation. Are we transforming our business to be completely online friendly? If your payments are a bank, to make everything cashless. If you're in cybersecurity, to move everything to the cloud. And are we spending enough and spending appropriately on technology? You don't want to overspend, but you probably need to spend enough, and you need to make sure it's on the right things and not necessarily on older, for example, on-premise equipment, but maybe moving yourself into a cloud or a hybrid cloud. Next slide, please. If we look at board members, here's what I would ask in terms of, is your board future ready? Do you have at least one technologist on the board? Somebody, not from your management, because this is somebody who you want to have help drive the management thinking. Do you have someone who's been a CIO, a CTO, or a CISO, a Chief Security Officer? Somebody who's really been spending a lot of time thinking about the technology of today and the future. Additionally, do you have somebody I would consider a digital expert? And I don't consider them quite the same. Someone who's been a chief digital officer, a chief marketing officer in today's business, a transformer, somebody who's already brought a company into the digital age, maybe even a data scientist who really thinks about the power of data, the data you have in your business, how to use it, and how to do things in your business online. Even if you're a mining company, right, which digs things up out of the ground and transships them and has a lot of physical items, there are ways that digital can add value. So examples that I've seen recently are doing a lot more customer communication and ordering with APIs, doing a lot more digital mapping of mine sites, doing a lot more remote control of mine sites and loading. So even if you think about the most physical products, their boards or companies, their boards still need some thought around digitization. I think we're moving into an age where sustainability, having somebody on the board who pays attention to and has experience with sustainability, given the pressures we face with climate change, global warming, consumer pressure in these areas, will show that you have a future-ready board. There's a lot written on both gender and age. I think there's a tendency to feel that younger people might not contribute enough to a board. I'm not suggesting we take 15-year-olds, but there's some very accomplished people in their late 20s and early 30s, particularly in some of the topics right above this, sustainability, digitization, technology, who might have more value and might be more future ready, even though slightly less experienced, than someone in their 70s. And I think a broad spectrum is great. I love seeing boards with a mix of ethnicity, age, gender. Obviously, with a board of 4 people, you can't do that much. If you have a board of 6 or 8, you can do a little bit more in terms of spread. And I think it gives you a lot of diversity of thinking. Really, that's what you want for a future-ready board, is diversity of thinking. But that comes from having some diversity of individuals and some diversity of their background. You definitely need independent board members. I'm probably biased because I've never been a non-independent board director, so you'll have to take it with a grain of salt. But generally what I see for companies that have directors who've helped build up the business over time or in a family, that it's very helpful to have some outside opinion. Those opinions need to be welcomed, to be, you know, and the internal people need to be receptive to them for them to be valuable. But it definitely helps you absorb new ideas and be future ready more quickly. And then I think a theme that we're seeing in many boards, it's consistent renewal of directors. So Grant Thornton, the board that I'm representing at this meeting, is an accounting firm, a big global accounting firm, as you know, and because they are private, they're very good about doing consistent renewal by electing different people from different countries within Grant Thornton to the board. And then there are 3 independent directors as well. And so that renewal means that we get lots of different ideas. I've got just a couple more slides. I think I'm almost out of time. Next slide. So board functions. I think things to make sure, many boards have these already, but some do not. You probably need a tech committee, a risk committee, and make sure that you're running an annual strategy or innovation offsite to force thinking about where are we going and not just how are our measures, what have we reported to the market or to our investors. And then last but not least, if you could go to my last slide, please, there's tech fluency. And this will come from your technologists, from your digital folks, and from people on the board who read a lot, who stay connected. I think there are plenty of people on your board who can really keep their eye out for things that are going on in the market. So the things that I would allude to are disruptors, you know, really following disruptor brands. So some examples, mostly from the US, Peloton, Impossible Foods, but not all, TikTok, Duolingo, Casper Mattresses, Encos in the Philippines, you know, Voyager and Maya, where they're really changing the nature of the business, whether it be payments or ride sharing on motorbikes or plant-based meat. Then I think there would be a need to really pay attention to trends. Artificial intelligence, I talked about before. VR, that was supposed to say IoT, I'm sorry, I see a typo now. Biometrics, so I know, for example, in the Philippines, Union Bank is doing some facial signups. Quantum computing, things that, again, one of the really important things to be future ready is understanding data and how data is going to be used and where to use it. It used to be we couldn't get data, now we can get almost too much data. So what do you do with it? How do you mine it? How do you use it to make a better customer experience and to improve the business? Then you need to look at different business models. Things like e-commerce, freemium, software as a service, on demand, and that could be on demand software, it could be on demand videos, as we've all gotten used to over the last few years. And then I think another really big fluency you need to have in tech is around security or security and privacy. There are a lot of laws, regulations coming out around preserving people's data, cybersecurity, privacy, protection against hacking. So I think that if you make sure that your board is able to discuss these with management, those two will add to your tech fluency. So thank you very much for your time. I hope I've been able to communicate to you that there's real financial value in having a digitally savvy board, and that there are 2 big groups of things where there are lots of concrete actions you can take to both digitize the board tools and digitize the board thinking. to help make your board and management team future ready. Thanks again for your time.
Oh, thank you, Aliza. That was quite interesting. Note, there's some questions already. We will be bringing up the questions later after the talks. I'd like to introduce our next speaker now. Please welcome, he's a governor of MAP and the vice chair of Union Bank of the Philippines, Dr. Justo Tito A. Ortiz. Hi, Tito.
Hi, thank you for having me. Joanna, can you put up the slides, please? Okay, so at Union Bank, we started a formal process, a future-ready process, working with Deloitte, and it goes in 12-month cycles. So we're still on the first 12-month cycles, and what I'm going to try to do here is describe that process. And each one of you, hopefully, will have your own prescriptions, including those that were given to you, shared with you by the previous speaker. So first slide, next slide. Let me start with the end game. You know, what do we define as a future-ready board member? And this becomes now the aspiration for each one of us in the Union Bank board. Now, if you go through it quite quickly, you will appreciate that it's an add-on to the usual commitment, network, competencies, and experience that we require from board members. And in short, 2 words, it really is about having a growth mindset and having the humility to unlearn and relearn. Because to a large extent, what we find is that our heuristics from our success as board members, because we got to the board by being very successful people, those heuristics no longer produce the predicted outcomes as we get deeper and deeper into the 4th industrial age, even though they were very valuable in the previous industrial age. Next slide. So we in the board meet 4 times a year, in addition to our 12 board meetings, regular board meetings, specifically to assess how we're doing in terms of creating a future board, future-ready board, both personal moves of each and every director and board collective moves. So we used a 4-step framework: discover, synthesize, activate, and review. So this is the process we go through. And I'll discuss a little bit each of them to just give you a glimpse of what it entails. Next slide. So on discover, we start with a discovery session with a third-party moderator held with the board members to answer each and every one individually these 3 questions that I have here. These questions revolve around the board's contributions, the challenges they face, the aspirations for change to improve the current practices. Then, next slide, we have discovery session with management. And in this session, management answers 5 key questions to give the board members another perspective. It would be the equivalent of a 360 feedback system where management is encouraged to maximize the areas of improvement for the board. After we go through these sessions of discovery, we have a synthesize session where these insights are collected to come up with recommended next steps for each individual board member, what we call personal moves, for the board as a whole, which are collective moves, and for the bank's business. Some of the insights by individual board members include the need to focus on learning by doing and not just by reading or attending seminars or listening to people, and developing the appetite and appreciation for the future business based on the current investments that they have decided upon. For the board as a whole, some insights were to heighten awareness on neo-competition and, importantly, to create more spaces to tackle hard issues, the elephant in the room. And for the bank's business, topics are related very much to technology, but also the culture and the way we're organized, how we do things, how we think, and the structures that we're building to be more agile and more relevant, more customer-centric. After we synthesize, we go through what we call a breakthrough lab, where we activate all of this. And in that activation, next slide, please. Yeah, we talk about the insights from this and focus on how to be a future-ready board member as an individual, thinking about the future organization's business and how the board and your contribution as a board member can improve as a whole to take the organization forward. One of the outputs of the session was for each director to come up with personal moves or self-improving actions to build one capability for future readiness. And there are guide questions that create what we call a personal manifesto, which is a guide to help the directors discover these personal moves and overcome the barriers that prevent them from doing so. After the responding to these questions, the board lists down their personal moves. Examples could be enrolling into our university for online courses on blockchain, data analytics, AI, or even gaming to understand different industries and different technologies. I personally enrolled in cybersecurity, which I agree with Ms. Knox is like top of the list of what we need to be more comfortable with. Another personal move could be joining one of 73 agile teams that are working in the bank to understand the mindset and how to observe the idea of minimum value propositions and sprints that we do every 2 weeks in a co-creative process with our customers. And even reverse mentoring, choosing a member of management or even an expert outside of the bank to mentor the director on some of the matters of the business that that director chooses to focus on. So those are personal moves and the process that we arrive at to derive them. Then there are board moves, which we do as a collective. And here, the problems and actions that should be taken by the board as a whole are put forward. Now, the way we did it is we used a design thinking tool called Crazy 8. And the group, the board, came up with close to 180 collective board moves, ideas in 8 minutes. So examples are embracing a culture of experimentation as opposed to getting things right the first time. Potentialities of investments, especially those that are in platforms, in apps, in marketplaces, where the metrics are not the traditional backward-looking P&L metrics. Being open to emerging technologies such as AI or blockchain and actually exposing ourselves in it, and redesigning many of the metrics and the balanced scorecard for this part of the institution that is moving clearly in the fourth industrial age, while the rest of the institution continues to innovate in its mainstream business. And then the last bit of the process, discover, synthesize, activate, review, is, as I mentioned, the board, after setting these personal moves and board moves, meets once a quarter on top of our regular board meetings to check and discuss in closed doors each other's progress on their commitments, discuss positive and negative points, and take the time to evaluate the effectiveness of these resolutions. And after a 12-month cycle, we repeat this process. So this is how we do it. This is our process. I don't know if this would be of value to all of you as a way of going forward and building a future-ready board as an institutionalized, systematized process within the organization that we actually work at to produce the desired outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tito. That was quite fascinating. I remember the boardroom of Union Bank is like something out of Star Trek. So I can imagine what those board sessions would be like. Quite interesting. Anyway, I'd like to call on our last speaker. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Hungry Workhorse and my vice chair of the ICT committee, Mr. Ray Lugtu.
Good afternoon, everyone. So can you see my screen, Patrick?
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right. So I will talk about the urgent need for digital savvy board. So I wrote about this topic, the same title, only this year, last month. But I wrote about the need for digital savvy board 4 years ago. So I founded a company called Hungry Workhorse. It's a 4-year-old company. It's a digital and culture transformation consulting firm. So we have been promoting, helping companies go through the journey of digital as well as culture transformation. And our conversations has been always at the CEO and board level. Now, first we define what digital transformation is. So we have done research globally, and I'm a fellow of the Institute for Digital Transformation, and this is the best definition that we will get. It's a set of strategic actions to accelerate business activities, processes, and competencies, and models to fully leverage the changes and opportunities, of course, using digital technologies. So it is a set of strategic actions, which means the owner of digital transformation is not the CIO, it's not the CMO, it is the CEO and the board. It is a board level ownership. Now look at this article and study from Harvard in 2017. The title says, the board of directors you need for digital transformation. And according to this article, 63% of executives say that partnership of the board is critical to the success of digital transformation efforts. There's a lot of talk about the failure of digital transformation because of the failure of the board to decide on this. Which brings us to this topic. So years ago, there's a popular phenomenon called Parkinson's effect. It says that the time spent on any item on the agenda will be the inverse proportion of the sum involved. Now, applying this to the board discussion, at any board meeting, the amount of time devoted to an item on the agenda will be the inverse proportion to the difficulty of the issue. This is a problem with many boards. Boards avoid, especially non-digital savvy boards, they avoid discussing this issue because to many board members it's a difficult issue to talk about. Now then came digital transformation and the fourth industrial revolution. So companies globally have been responding. So companies now started to install next-gen directors. So there's a growing number of next-gen directors which are being appointed to boards globally. They bring a lot of knowledge, such as what Aliza said, cybersecurity, AI, machine learning, and Industry 4.0 technologies. Others have first-hand experience of digital transformation, as also prescribed in Aliza's presentation, including organization design, which is important now in the context of digital transformation, knowledge in customer insight or social communication. So these are inevitably experts in these disciplines tend to come from different generations. Now, there's also a study conducted by Deloitte in 2017. There's a growing membership of technology-focused board members. So these are technology enabled board members with expertise, which has become a key criterion for corporate board appointments. The percentage of public companies that appointed technology-focused board members have grown over the last 6 years from 10% to 17%. And this was 2017. And interestingly, this figure almost doubles to 32% for high performers. So as Aliza showed in the performance of those tech-savvy boards, there is a correlation with tech savviness of the board and high performance of the company. Now, my company surveyed top publicly listed corporations. So let's move now to the Philippines. We surveyed top publicly listed corporations. We studied 31 publicly listed. We counted the number of board members with tech background. Tech background are those with technology experience in other companies, either as board or executive, or with technology background in training. So here's the finding. Out of 31 companies publicly listed, there is 5 or 16% with no tech background board members. So 5, and these are top 31 companies in the Philippines. There's 11 of them, or 35%, with 1 to 2 corporate directors with tech background. And then there's 15 of them, 15 companies with 48 or more than 2 corporate directors with tech background. Right? So it's the first time we did this, so we don't have a longitudinal comparison. This is just a snapshot of the Philippine composition of boards. Now let's relate this as a barrier to digital transformation. In 2017, Microsoft did a study of digital transformation in Asia Pacific. So they asked over thousands of IT and technology executives on what are the barriers to digital transformation. So interestingly, in the Philippines, number 1 is the lack of organizational leadership to ideate, plan, and execute digital transformation. That is the top answer. Of course, there's others like cyber threats, there's lack of digitally skilled workforce, but what's glaring is that number 4, there is lack of leadership from board of directors and executives. Now, this is interesting because if we compare this to the Asia average, these are the top barriers. So cyber threats, lack of digitally skilled workforce, lack of supporting government policies, lack of leadership. So when leadership, we're speaking about management here. So interestingly, there is no mention of board as an average across Asia. In the Philippines, it is number 4. Now let's relate that. Let's relate that to the tenure and age of board members in the Philippines. We lifted this study from Bloomberg and named the Philippines as the country with Asia's longest serving directors. Can be found in the Philippines. So this is the graph showing that. If you look at this, Philippines is at the top with oldest average and the tenure compared to other countries in Asia. No? And corporate directors in the country sit on boards average of 10 years versus the average of Asia Pacific of 6.5 years. Now look at this. The average board member is also highest average age, highest in Southeast Asia. The average is 65.4 years. In the Philippines, it's 58.7 years. Now I'm showing these data because we're trying to see patterns. There's no study yet on exactly the correlation between these and among these variables. So according to Bloomberg, Philippine companies have the region's oldest directors and longest serving board as owners keep their trusted advisors on tight hold on the reins of banking, property, and retail giants, with some founders and their relatives staying on boards for decades, and independent directors typically handed a minority role. Families are able to exercise control over a conglomerate even after it goes public. So this is Bloomberg's study of board composition across Asia Pacific. Now, if we put this within the backdrop of the digital economy, we have been named as the smallest digital economy in Southeast Asia. So I'm giving all this information. There may be a correlation. That may be the reason why we have the smallest digital economy in Southeast Asia, because companies are not embracing digital transformation, because we have the longest tenure of boards in the Philippines and the oldest average age in Asia Pacific. So that's my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ray. Okay, so we're now ready for questions. That was quite fascinating. Actually, digital transformation has been one of the advocacies of ICT committee for this year, and we were planning presentations on digitization, and until this COVID crisis hit, and overnight everyone became digitized. Overnight everyone knew what Zoom was. Most of us never heard of Zoom before this crisis. I have to repeat a joke that someone told me, that when they asked a survey of companies what were the driving forces behind your digitization, and one was the board, the CEO, the CTO, the CIO, and then the last option was COVID-19. And I think for a lot of us, COVID-19 was had forced a lot of companies that wouldn't even consider digitization to go digitize. So as I mentioned earlier, please submit your questions through the Q&A button. We have a few already here. Okay, so here's a question. How can a board composed mainly of family members be future ready? So anyone want to answer that? Tito? Ray?
Well, I mean, we have a board with family members, 7 out of 15. We have 5 independents. And I described to you the process that we're going through together. So it's not the family members driving it. It's all directors together driving this in a formal institutional process. Family members have as much interest as the public in making sure that their businesses are future ready. Because if you think about it, BCG just came out with a study on publicly listed companies and estimated that the average age of a publicly listed company is 35 years. So I think family members are just as interested, if not more interested, in longevity of the business. And I think that the fact that we have a formal process that we apply in 5-year, in 12-month cycles, I think speaks highly of the commitment that one needs to have to make this happen, because it can't be an ad hoc process. It needs to be something very formal, institutional, and where there's hard talk in those 4 board meetings we have every year about each and every one of us. How did we do on those personal moves that we committed to, and how did we as a collective achieve what we said we would do? And I think that we're holding each other accountable, and not, stratifying it between family and independent and whatever. It's a whole board objective.
Okay, thank you, Tito. That was that's a nice answer. Here's another one. I'm a 40-something-year-old female board member with a board filled with 60 and 70-something-year-old members. What is your advice to get the older board members to listen to the younger board members? That's a pretty good question. Anyone want to take that on?
I guess I'm closest to the description of the person who asked the question. So I think one thing I didn't mention that's interesting is a lot of the literature shows that if you have a sort of a minority group, whether it's young people or women or non-Filipinos or whatever on a board, usually there need to be 3 of them in order for them to be listened to. It's very hard when there's one lone voice in the wilderness. So, and it's just something about human dynamics. It doesn't mean that that one person is wrong or that the other people are wrong. So I think there are 2 things. I think one, in terms of future readiness, boards need to think about really being diverse enough that on different points of view, there's maybe more than one person who's the only one out there. And the other, I think, is for the person who asked, because you are alone, you probably need to spend a bit more time socializing your views. I mean, you never want to go around the chairman or do anything that shouldn't be done in front of all the board members, but maybe spending some time with people one-on-one outside the boardroom, talking about your views and why, and thinking things through so that you understand their perspective and they come to understand yours. Because I don't think there's any amount of shouting or pleading or sharing data in a boardroom when you're the one person with a perspective. In my experience, it tends not to work. You have to have gotten some other people to share that view. I mean, maybe what you could say is you're the one person in the first board meeting, but by the end of a year, if the board is willing to keep spending time on this issue, you'll have convinced them. But usually, in my experience, it's better to have some time outside the boardroom talking to people, as long as the chairman knows. I don't think it should ever be seen as going around the chair.
Okay, thank you, Eliza. Anyone else? Ray, would you have, you're quite young. I might be in some boards where you're the youngest.
I think the point of Tito is highly relevant, institutionalizing it, and really creating a process around the discussions. Those interesting questions, the questions that you need to answer. I think those are questions that should be answered by all members of the board. I'd like to answer also, Patrick, the question of Attorney Kapunan. There was a question about law firms. Okay. I think there was a question here, Patrick.
Yeah. Attorney Kapunan was asking if we have suggestions for law firms.
Yeah. So I'm chairman of a law tech firm. It's the name of the company is My Legal Wiz, and we have been talking to law firms, and we always thought that law firms are the most undigitized organizations in the Philippines, second only to schools, and schools now are digitizing fast. So law firms are the most undigitized, based on what we have discovered. And speaking of boards, no, I think it will also make sense to include a non-lawyer or maybe a tech lawyer in the board of law firms.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. That would be a really good. Actually, for any organization, there should be someone or more than one person in the board who's got tech knowledge. Tito also was pointing that out in his presentation that if you don't have any, then it's the duty of the board to try to become tech savvy or reverse mentor with their IT people. IT people. I've been always at the opposite end there, where you're the IT person trying to convince the board to invest, and they always look at IT, oh, another expense. But you speak in terms of the board's language, where you're concerned about the well-being of the organization. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, Patrick, let me just add to that because I don't want to leave the message with a disparity between older. You know, we don't leaping from today to the future. It's not a chasm that you need to progress. And a lot of these older people with experience, with capabilities, have what we call domain knowledge.
Mhm.
So when you digitize, you could go from something that's purely futuristic and bring it to the present, but in many cases you're moving from the present into the future, and the domain knowledge is very critical. There are a lot of essential elements of our unique, especially when it involves the law or regulations or the government. You need to be able to bridge today with tomorrow, and open-minded board members that are old, because board members are intelligent people.
Mhm.
So it's a question of open-mindedness, not intelligence. They have the intelligence, but they need to have a growth mindset, and that requires humility. And I think that's what we need to. I just want to make that point because I don't want to make it sound like it's young versus old, right? I mean, there's a lot of value from the domain knowledge of experienced, capable, committed board members, and their networks are very important in creating digital transformation because we're all part of a bigger ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Tito. That was a very, very, very good insight, actually. It was something we had discussed in our previous meeting, and I think you answered it perfectly. Domain knowledge is important, and if you're open-minded, you can always learn. Okay, JJ Moreno is asking here, how important is the role of the chairman of the board in getting the board to be digitally ready?
So, I mean, I can take a stab at that. And I also want to say that I agree completely that it's not about age. I think a spread of age, just like a spread of gender or backgrounds, helps. And it is good to have some people on the board who've been around, who've seen the business through a bunch of different times. I think the chairman's role is really, really important. I think sometimes people undervalue, like the chairman isn't just the person who calls the board to order. The chairman is like the CEO of the board. And I think their role in paving the way and setting out the kinds of things that we just heard that Union Bank of Philippines is doing, you know, to get directors to think about things, like the chairman is the leader. So I would have to say that I think the chairman's role is extremely important.
Thank you, Eliza. That's a great answer. Okay, Alfredo asks, should there be a strict limit on the number of boards that an independent director should be a member of? That way, the director can focus much better on the needs of the boards he serves and can better prepare for addressing the future needs of the company. Not exactly a tech question, but would anyone want to tackle that? Anyone? Attorney Lim, would you have
Yeah, Attorney Lim.
legal opinion on this one?
What's that, Patrick?
Is this the limit on independent board ones, Patrick?
Yes.
So I think Attorney Lim, they were asking, should be a strict limit? And I just want to say before the attorney goes, I'll take a quick stab at it because I'm not legal, but in what I've seen in various countries is the shareholder associations, the activist shareholder associations will tend to oppose board members very publicly if they have maybe more than 5, sometimes more than 4 boards when they are not working. If they have an executive role, they tend to get pretty strident at 2 boards. I don't know what the situation is in the Philippines, but I've definitely seen that firsthand in Australia, which is the view, you need to be able to put time in this. And it's not just time when things are good, but the most important issue seems to be, the directors are most needed if there's a crisis. And so that's when you need to really put time in. If anybody hears, I've had a couple times where there have been crises and boards need to spend a lot more time than they do in normal board meetings. You have to know that the directors can be there. So again, I don't know what the legalities are in the Philippines, but for sure in Australia, the shareholder activist groups say choose a limit if you're working full time, 4 to 5 if you're like fully retired and have a board portfolio. But Attorney Lim, I'm interested about the Philippines too.
Hello, Francis. I think the SEC has come up with a revised code of corporate governance where there are recommendations and suggestions, not only on term limits. I think that term limit now, I think the SEC chairman here is 9 consecutive years, successive years without re-election on a per company basis. And in terms of board membership, if I recall it correctly, the recommendation is not more than 5 board membership in publicly listed companies. But that's just a recommendation under the comply or explain rule. I think Chair Emil Aquino is here, unless he has left. There are rules, but it's just recommendations because we have adopted the comply or explain approach to governing publicly listed companies. But I agree that age, not really that material. It's so far as digital readiness is concerned, it's the open-mindedness or the willingness of the director, no matter how his age is, to embracing digital transformation, to become digital savvy. Because I think that's a sine qua non now, in this day and age.
Yeah, so there's still hope for a lot of us to become digitally savvy. Okay, any more questions there? Okay, I have one here. What are the best ways for making senior board members more future ready? So I guess that would be the what they call this. That would be a related question. How do you make the senior board members more future ready or digital savvy?
Well, I took that up in my talk. I mean, one of the ways that we did, as an example, is learning by doing. Mm-hmm. So the first thing they do is they choose online courses from our university, which our executives take. Cybersecurity, like I personally chose cybersecurity. So I'm going to take an online course. And then I'm required to teach back. So after I take the course, I've got to go in front of the board and teach them what I learned. And I should have a third level of understanding so that they know what I said. The other one is the mentoring process that I mentioned. That's very important, to be mentored by either a third party or management. And being a member of an agile team, actually working on things. So that's not technical, but it's the way of doing things, our way of thinking using design thinking methodologies. So that's an example of things. So this formal process that I described is important because you need buy-in, you need ownership to that. It takes work, right? And that would be my contribution to the answer to the question. I mean, it's just a piece of it, but it's one of the things that we do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tito. That was a very nice question. And yes, a reiteration of what you did present earlier. And of course, humility. That's important because I can imagine a 60-something senior executive joining a group of young techie people in a circle. You'd have to have a bit of humility to be game to join these what you call agile teams. So Corazon Claudio is asking, what is certain about the future is uncertainty, especially of adverse consequences and natural man-made processes or risks. Digital transformation is but one important strategy in facing major risks. For example, climate change in the future. What are the best strategies or major processes are used in your board, which you have observed in other boards that aimed at making them future ready and prepared to face such major risks? So, see, Corazon Claudio brings a very important, it's not just COVID, we also have to worry about things like climate change that may radically change the way our businesses are run. So would anyone want to take on this question? What are the best strategies or major processes used in your board?
So
Ray?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead, Eliza.
I was just going to do two quick ones. So one is, I think Dr. Ortiz was talking about having used a consultant, and I know in a couple of my boards, we've used consultants to go through kind of a risk heat map, and then we'll use that map for a few years about what are the risks. They tend to get plotted on a graph of the impact and the likelihood. And obviously you want to pay attention to the ones that are furthest up at the right, which are high risk. It's like high damage, high impact, and high likelihood, and mitigate those first. And then I think the other is to have these annual strategy sessions. People, I think the old adage is SWOT, or whatever, but opportunities, threats, why can't I think of it right now? But everybody knows what it is: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. But something like that, or more modern version, where at the strategy planning session, you're talking about lots of different kinds of threats, because it could be digital. There are other kinds of disruption going on. It could, as you said, it could be a security threat. So I think there are lots of different kinds of threats. It could be regulatory. There's a lot of regulatory change going on right now for certain industries. So I think identifying those would be then key to figuring out as a board how you're going to overcome them, or what you'd like management to come back with.
Right. So I just wanted to add there, Patrick. So we're advising a few companies. So it's only now that I think in the consciousness of many management and executives, the understanding gray swan and black swan events. Black swan events are unknown probability, high impact events. Gray swan are low probability and high impact events. So one tool that Eliza mentioned is scenario mapping. This is mapping again, the risk and likelihood. And there's a heat map that can be employed for executives to come up with strategies to address high impact and low probability to high probability events.
Thank you, Ray. Ray actually holds you hold a seminar on digitalization, right?
Yes, digital transformation.
Digital transformation. So this is you might want to contact Ray privately if you're interested in that, because he has a lot of really good points and a lot of experience in this transitioning. We overnight became had to digitize, and a lot of organizations are digitizing right now. We have documents that we are now doing electronic signatures. We have communications that are done electronically. And as such, the risk also has increased. There's already stories of cyber crimes being committed in this age of COVID. Does anyone have any pointers on cybersecurity? I guess number one would be knowledge, domain knowledge. If you're not aware of the risks, then it's hard to impose strategies for your organization from the board level. Anyone want to tackle that? The security, how to address security risks now in the age of COVID?
Well, since you pushed raise business, I'll take a quick shot and just say you should make sure. I mean, there are lots of security issues, but I think one of the biggest changes in the pandemic is that way more people are working from somewhere that's not in the office, right? And so we have many, many more connections from someone's home or a coffee shop or their beach house or the subway or I don't know wherever they've been able to go and hide and get some quiet away from their family or their neighbors or whatever, to the origin servers at the company. And so I do think one of the most important things to look at right now in terms of the cyber knowledge is, you know, having some sort of protection of those connections. So Cloudflare has a product called Access that's very good. It replaces VPN that helps keep those connections secure, and it's a lot easier to use than a VPN, but if people have VPNs, that will do it too. I think most companies have figured this out during the pandemic, but if you have not or just haven't had time to do it, I think it's really, really important. And it's also important for the board materials, same thing. That's why these board portals are important, because you don't want those documents floating around somewhere where a hacker could get to your company financials or even worse, payment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are issues, thank you, Eliza. There are issues like data privacy also, which right now with all the data out there, it becomes very vital that the board is aware of the risks involved. So digital savvy board would be vital for this day and age. Okay, here's a question from Michael Sherwin.
Topic, I just want to add
yes.
An additional insight, no, that we spend a lot of money on preventing cybersecurity risks. I mean, it's high up in the heat maps of most organizations, and the more digital you become, the more. But at the end of the day, we need to probably focus more, invest more, and actually practice more resiliency. Because the idea that we're not going to be hacked is not a viable idea, right? Chances are something will happen. So what's important, yes, we need to do all those firewalls and all those protections. We need to have, you know, our whole dark web surveillance and the whole works. But it's important to invest in resiliency. How do you recover? How do you recover your data? How do you recover your operations? How do you get going again? And I just want to make that point, because that's a very critical element in the whole resilience, in the whole cybersecurity strategy: protection and recovery, resiliency. And that costs a lot of money and needs a lot of resources. And people need to focus on it just as much as on the prevention. Thank you.
Thank you, Tito. Yes.
Yeah. Patrick, I just wanted to add, no. So speaking of boards, no, so there's some statistics now that the primary target of hackers now are senior executives, no? Board members that are low tech. No? So I've seen this as well in Philippines, no, when I was you know, in a separate technology business. So board members who are not tech savvy, no, are primary target of hackers. And all of these are behavioral in nature. No? So that's why it's important to educate ourselves, no, as board members. No? If we're low tech, no, we have to understand tech. No? All right. So fishing is big business in the Philippines. Also globally targeting senior executives.
It's called whaling. So it's not just fishing. It's whaling when you're dealing with a CEO or a board chairman who is you're able to hack. That's yes, I agree with that. I also agree with Tito. I think that's a good point where you're concerned about BCP or resiliency, because this became a major issue with a lot of corporations, especially after Yolanda, when Yolanda happened and Ondoy happened, and then now we've got these unexpected things like earthquakes, and now we have a COVID epidemic. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. Next week we may be on ECQ or GCQ, and so our business is being disrupted practically every week, depending on what the government decides. So I have a question here from Michael Sherwin Makatangay. How is the board's succession planning discussed and planned? Is the board succession plan scenarios, are they important also? Thank you. So would anyone like to tackle that? Board succession planning?
Sure, I can take a stab at it. I mean, I think that that's part of the NOMS committee responsibility, and then they bring it to the full board, and it's quite important, and most boards need to, roll people off. Again, in the places I've been, 9 years is seen as pretty much the limit for how long you should have people on a board. Very occasionally, there'll be a reason to keep somebody on longer. And so you need to be constantly looking for people for board renewal and board refresh. And some of the people that come on should be successors to the chairman. So we generally have a plan that, like, I recently rolled off a board and we'd said, people, we're going to take turns rolling off. Who's up next? Where do we go? It's all very transparent. What kind of person? We usually have, in my experience, we've had a matrix of the kind of skills we need on the board. So if this person goes off, or if we just decided we need a new skill because of something, this is the profile that we're looking for. Some boards only use their own network to recruit. Oftentimes, I think they're getting more and more using a search firm to recruit, so they can find you somebody maybe that you wouldn't have otherwise thought of. And yeah, I think it's quite important, and is usually pretty regular. It should be pretty much a regular topic at the NOMS committee in what I've seen.
Thank you, Alisa. So I have another question here. This is quite interesting. Well, actually, this is what are the main success indicators of having a future-ready board? So would you really know, how would you be able to say that you actually have a future-ready board? So I guess I can direct this at Tito. What are the KPIs, or how can you determine that the board is actually future-ready already, if you achieved your objective?
Well, so I described the process, and we meet 4 times a year. Personal moves, collective moves of the board. The future doesn't come all of a sudden. It comes in progression. And therefore, that concept of future ready needs to be time bound. And that assessment we do every 12 months, where you can do a combination of backward look and forward look and see whether you're moving in that direction, right? And then, as was previous, the prior question of succession, that's an opportunity to really sort of inject new blood into the board. And there's no metric like a number. It's really a self-assessment. And like I said, we meet 4 times a year only to do that. Only to do that. How are we? Self-assessment of ourselves with your colleagues commenting, self-assessment of the board as a collective. So right now, that's how we do it. It's not a scorecard, but a meeting where we talk, transparently about the objectives we set personally and collectively and how we're performing against that. And then 12 months later, we set a new set of goals, and we go on and on and on as we get further and further into the future.
Mhm. Thank you. How about you, Ray? Do you have any comments about that? What would be a success indicator for if you? I can say I can claim I have a future-ready board already in my organization. You're on mute, Ray.
I'd like to cite what Aliza mentioned in her presentation. So some components of boards, and I always stress, digital savviness, having domain expertise, and Aliza, pointed them out nicely. Some domain expertise in cybersecurity, AI possibly, and in the study of what we did with Philippine boards, there's a few companies with future readiness. Their board members are solidly having those domain expertise and foundations.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Ray. Okay, let's see if we have more questions. Just click on the Q&A button at the bottom, please. Not on the Viber or on the, that would be the best way for me to be able to read your questions right away. So are there any more questions here? I think we have okay. Yeah. What do you think is the competitive edge of the Philippines over other ASEAN countries? So you did show in your, well, I'm asking Ray, you did show that we have older and more, what do you call this, more tenured board members among other countries. What would be our advantages? What would you consider our advantages?
So I think the question is, as a country, what would be our advantages as a country? Is that right, Patrick?
Yeah.
Well, we did some research about this and written about it a few years back. And there are a few. There's only three competitive advantages of Philippines. Number one is we are a creative country. We're probably the most creative one. We talk about go to any country, you see artists, you see architects, creative in software development and so on. We are probably the most creative. Couple that with customer hospitality. We are probably the most hospitable country in the world. That's why our helpers and seamen are prized in other countries. Hotel workers are prized because we are the most hospitable country in the world. And then lastly, we have still a good faculty for English globally. We still rank highly. So combine all of those. I think there's no country that combines all of those. We're not competitive in technology, engineering. Our engineering graduates are going abroad. So if those are key and core to Philippines. We are trying to develop the science and technology, but we're far from getting there without the proper support.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else who would like to answer that? What they consider our advantage? So Ray mentioned hospitality, creativity, and of course, we are all very fluent in English. So compared to other countries in the ASEAN. So we are approaching our time limit already. Are there any more questions? Just click on the Q&A button so we can get some of your, I'm looking through, I'm still getting used to looking through multiple screens right now for the different questions. I'd like to ask also before I bring on our last questions, Eliza, Ray, and Tito, is it okay if we circulate your presentations among the MAP members? I've been getting a lot of really positive feedback on the message board right now, and
Absolutely.
okay, Eliza, Ray, and
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to announce that the speakers we're going to be sharing their presentations. So, and also since they are members of, Tito and Ray are members of MAMP, you can always bring it up in the future if you have other questions about this. So, any more questions here? Our Q&A button seems to be, I've gone through everything. Let's see, how about here? So what would the future look like for your organization or industry or your sector in, let's say, 5 years? That would be what would happen in 5 years. There's so many changes. Anyone have an idea? How about you, Tito? The banking industry, how would that change in the next 5
It'll
years?
take me 2 hours to answer that question.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know. I think one of the major changes that we're going to experience is that technology is a great leveler. It gives people choice. It gives people access. So I think that the idea of product centricity, which is really going to give way over time to customer centricity. And the idea of us being the sole producer of certain products and services that we sell, distribute to our customers is going to be challenged when customers have more choice, right? Because one of the major, I don't know if we'll get there in 5 years, but for banking specifically, there are already open banking regulations. And what that does is it lowers the switching costs from moving from one bank to another, and therefore making it easy for a customer now to have a broader array of products and services available to them, which is difficult today because the switching costs are so high.
Thank you, Tito. That was very nice insight. Actually, that will work for not just the banking industry. I think your answer would work for a lot of industries. So I'm getting the signal that time's up. Again, before we adjourn, though, I think President Francis might have some parting words.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. There were a lot of learnings from this session, and I think I'm not surprised that the members are very interested in the materials that have been shown. I think some of the takeaways are that to prepare our board to be a future-ready board, there can be a focus program, or what Tito calls as a formal institutional process. I think that's very important for the corporate world, to really be very, very, very conscious of this, that a process can be put in place to make their boards future ready. Number two, as Arisa has pointed out, there's a relationship really between the company performance and the digital savvy board. Number three, while the Philippines has the oldest and the longest serving board members, I think that does not really matter. I think we can capitalize on what Tito is described as domain knowledge. And what is more important, if I understood it correctly, is that it's really the open-mindedness or the growth mindset of our board that matters, regardless of their age. And number four, I think we talk about the competitive advantages of the Philippines, and being hospitable, most creative country, English speaking was mentioned. But I think in my mind, I think we are a relatively young generation. If I recall it correctly, we're just averaging 23.7 years old. And I think that is a very big capital in terms of making our population digital savvy, and will help us a long way in our digital transformation as a country. So thank you very much, Arisa, Tito, Ray, Patrick, and everybody there for our members to join. And I think, again, thank you to the panel, no, for the learnings that you have shared with MAP today. Keep well and stay safe.
Thank you, Aliza. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Tito. This is a very interesting and very enjoyable one. Let's look out for the next GMM. Thank you. This MAP 6th online GMM is now adjourned.